Remember how I said that this week's episode of Vikings, in many ways, was superior to the preceding episode? Well, well, in some ways, Hannibal was also superior, but in contrast to Vikings, there were more ways in which Hannibal was inferior to the previous episode. There was no repeat trial, at least not in this episode. I'm guessing they have to find another judge. but Will begins to unlock more memories thanks to finally opening up to Dr. Chilton. And he really, his suspicions about Hannibal really start to come into perspective. And another thing that starts to come into perspective is finally Jack Crawford's wife and her terminal condition, because it was established in season 1 that she had cancer, specifically lung cancer. And ever since then, the show has seemingly forgotten about her. So it was very nice to see her back. Gina Torres still playing her. And that actually leads me to my first big point, is that by far the strongest and most emotionally gripping moments in this episode were the numerous scenes dealing with Jack's wife and how she's trying to cope with having lung cancer, and how Jack is trying to cope with eventually losing her. Those scenes, all of them were brilliant, and throwing Hannibal Lecter into the mix only served to make it even juicier. I'm not trying to be disgusting by saying that. But yeah, they were very powerful scenes. I was actually very impressed at how they managed to capture. I mean, I've been impressed from this show since the beginning. When this show first aired, when this show was first advertised, I was like, come on. They're doing a TV version of Hannibal, really? Granted, I was a little more hopeful for this than I was for Bates Motel, but I digress. I still have yet to see Bates Motel, although I hear it's very good. I digress again. But the scenes between Lawrence Fishburne and Gina Torres, and in addition, between Gina Torres and Mads Mikkelsen, were just fantastic. And these actors really captured the pain of going through this type of situation pretty much perfectly. Because this, to say the very least, this situation is not a pleasant one to go through. Having a cancerous family member. So to see them able to pull off this very serious subject matter and do it justice, both emotionally and in terms of how this affects the overall drama of the show, I thought was an impressive feat, even for this show and its creative team. Now, somewhat less stellar is this week's serial killer. Now, I mentioned last week how seeing as they were putting Will on trial, there was no serial killer last week. So it kind of broke that formula that it had going for basically all of season 1. So to see them go back to that formula is, I'm not gonna lie, was a little disappointing, and honestly, the killer this week was one of their weaker efforts. I'm not saying the killer was bad, because she started off interesting. You've probably seen this in all the commercials for this episode, in all the promos. It's someone who makes a beehive out of a human corpse, and once you actually learn the origin story of, the origin of this particular killer, um, and basically what her motive was. It's good, but it's not quite as strong or as well fleshed out in comparison to a lot of other serial killers on this show. And B, they resolve it too fast. This serial killer was probably the weakest part of the episode, mainly because the her whole plot line was severely underdeveloped compared to a lot of other weekly serial killers on this show. I mean, if they were going to do a serial killer like this, when they've already got so much on their plate with Jack's terminally ill wife, with Will Graham's imprisonment, and with the investigation into Hannibal Lecter, if they were going to throw in a weekly serial killer for that, then they should have at least made it more than one episode. They resolve it at the end of this episode, and another disappointing aspect of it, aside from that, is the fact that it never really ties into the main narrative all that much. There's only one point where it ties into the main narrative, and that's when Hannibal Lecter points out that the bee stings, that's when Hannibal Lecter points out to Hettianne Park that maybe the killer was hiding something, and she later finds out that she was using bee stings to hide acupuncture marks. And that eventually leads her to further investigate Hannibal Lecter. So that's the one time that it actually ties into the overall arc of the season. So just that lack of tying it in is really what kept me from getting nearly as invested as in this beehive serial killer than it was. Like I said, it was the weakest part of the episode, and granted, part of that has to do with some of the other elements in the episode that were so strong by comparison. Because like I said, Gina Torres's character and her cancer were handled beautifully, and I think it was an extraordinarily cruel thing that Hannibal did at the end. But at the same time, I'm glad Gina Torres is not off the show. The stuff with Hugh Dancy and him trying to separate himself from Hannibal Lecter so as to possibly expose the good doctor as a cannibal in the future, I thought was an interesting move. I thought that finally allowing Dr. Chilton to become his therapist was a pretty intriguing move. You know that Will has an ulterior motive to doing so, but some of the beneficial results, albeit painful results, I think he did not see coming. So as unpleasant as it is to work with Dr. Chilton, I don't think Will would necessarily regret working with him, given the results that it has yielded. Because it did open up some of his memories, and once again we get some of the cool visual imagery here, where Will essentially steps into a scene from season 1, where Hannibal Lecter is talking to Eddie Izzard's character, basically saying, "I know you're not the Ripper because I am the Ripper," and terrible thing to have your identity taken from you, and it basically replays that scene. Either that or they reshoot that scene, except Hugh Dancy in a prison uniform comes out of this mental prison cell and basically starts watching the scene from a third party perspective. He watches Hannibal Lecter calm his mild seizure. He watches him interact with Eddie Izzard's serial killer character. So yeah, I was impressed with Hugh Dancy's story arc, with Will Graham's story arc, although I think they're going to have to do something to mix it up, because they are giving you just kind of little by little hints as to as to what's eventually going to happen, what he's eventually going to know for certain. But at this point, it still does not match up with the circumstance of Hannibal Lecter's capturing Red Dragon. And at this point, I don't really think it will. I don't think it can, conceivably. Not if they keep up this really fantastic writing they got going. The acting is still rock solid all around, although I was kind of missing Carolyn DeVernus this time around as Alana Bloom. But I guess they couldn't really find a place for her. Although they may have found a place for her if they had just done away with the Beehive Killer. But again, I sound like a broken record at this point. Yeah, the acting is still very compelling all around. Mads Mikkelsen, Hugh Dancy, and Lawrence Fishburne continue to shine. Gina Torres was just phenomenal, and even Hetty Park got a little bit more material to work with this time around. I mean, I think she's been criminally underused, but I'm interested to see what's going to happen to her, especially with that cliffhanger. And yeah, this was a strong episode, but with some noticeable weaknesses. The weaknesses here were more apparent, and they kind of stood out more than when this show has had weaknesses in the past. Because like I said, the acting is good, the direction is great, the cancer subplot was honestly the best part of the episode. It was the most compelling. Partially probably due to the fact that it was a change of pace from the sort of material that they have been tackling this season. And really the weakest part, again, was the serial killer, who either should not have been in this episode or should have been... Or, let me put it this way. If they had to put her in this show, if they had to include this particular killer in the show, they should have devoted more than one episode to it. And I think they should have just let this episode play out without the serial killer subplot, because it contributed very little in the grand scheme of things. But other than that, this episode was still a very solid entry in the second season of Hannibal. That cliffhanger, it has me pumped, has me... When it was over, I was like, what? Come on! And any show that makes me really that anxious to see the next episode is obviously doing something right. And in all honesty, that's just one of many things this show is doing right.